eagle has landed. Welcome to tonight's show. Welcome to Narrative Live on a Tuesday. It's the countdown. Hey, Noel Casler. It's nice to have you back on the show.
Hey, Zev. Good to be here, man.
I got to say, before we get going on anything else, I had a chance to listen to your podcast, and it is friggin' amazing. It's so damn good. Everyone needs to check out the Noel Casler podcast. It's hilarious. It's just you unspun for like 30 minutes of just great stuff. It's just amazing. Really good value, and everyone needs to download it, absorb it, get as much of it as you can, because Noel Casler is on his way up. You're having a moment, I think, Noel, I believe.
Well, thank you, Zev. You're too kind. It's kind to say that about the podcast.
It's all about it's all of the truth here. You know, we all tell the truth. We have such a busy show tonight because there's all this breaking news regarding Donald Trump. Finally, a grand jury, convened. I guess that's a term. Is it the term?
Yeah.
I gotta say, everyone's getting very excited. I feel like I've been excited before, and I'm not sure I want to jump into that excited phase yet, because we've been promised a lot of this in the past, and it's never really been anything. So, and especially with Vance, I'm not sure I 100% trust him. But who knows? What do you think? Do you think this is it looks like indictments will be coming? I'd say that's probably reasonable assumption, but that doesn't necessarily mean anyone's going to jail.
He's not going to jail, Zev. That guy's never going to do a day in jail. I'm sorry to disappoint anybody. He's 75 in 2 weeks. Like, he can drag this out until, he's 80 and then just skip the country. And I know everybody's really excited. And obviously, and there's talk that there's other, grand juries that have already been convened. So, but I share your hesitancy because, obviously, they'll probably decide to bring charges, but this grand jury meets 3 days a week for 6 months. So everyone's acting like he's going to get hauled out in handcuffs. They're not even going to make a decision until November.
And we don't know yet if Weisselberg is actually going to flip. Everyone's making that assumption too. There's no good reason for Weisselberg to really flip. I mean, he's not going to flip. I don't see him flip. No. Do you know him, by the way? Have you met him?
I don't. I've been in the room with him. I've never had a conversation with him. And I've been in the room with him, at The Apprentice kind of thing. They would have the executives down in the audience. He was actually on The Apprentice.
I know he was. Yeah. I don't remember him, but I remember people told me that he was. He was, I guess, why did they take him off? Was he just too dull and not exciting? Or they needed to make space for Donald.
That other guy got fired too. There was another guy who became really popular. He was one of Donald's executives, and they yanked him off. He was the old guy with the white hair. I forget his name. George, I think it was.
Right.
But back to your earlier point about Weisselberg, the guy's like a mob accountant. He's been working for Trump for 50 years. It's not the first time that there's been some malfeasance and some, cheating on the books and all this kind of thing. I think, as you've covered here, he knows who Trump's laundering money for, so it's not like he's afraid of Donald Trump. He's got more motivation to protect his family by taking the rap or taking the fifth or fighting it out in court himself for years to come than flipping on Donald Trump. I just don't see that happen. This is like a second in command at the Trump organization, starting with Fred Trump.
They must have had this conversation, maybe. Do you think they've had this conversation? Like, if this ever goes down, none of us flip, right? That's the deal. They must have had that conversation.
Those are the guys you hire. You think Fred Trump hired a guy as his chief accountant, basically the guy in charge of all his books and all his money, who was going to flip on him? Fred Trump was building, for the Genovese crime family in the 50s and 60s. You only bring in people that you can trust. And Weisselberg is a made man in the Trump organization. So
and his whole family, the entire family, everything is based on the private education, the kids' salaries, everything, their whole future, their names, everything. So he's not going to necessarily flip, although they're trying very hard to convince people that he will. Yeah. We'll have time to talk about all of that later on. I know everyone's very excited about it. Andrew Laufer is going to join us in about 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes. We'll talk about that. But, I'm so excited tonight because we have Tarah, I should say, Wheeler. She's probably the smartest person that I've ever met. I think she might be the smartest one, at least on paper, at least. Look at her. She's a cyber project fellow at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. Anyone who knows anything about Harvard University, it's great. Also that the Kennedy School of Government is the school of government. She writes in foreign policy, where she writes about cyber warfare, which is where I got to know her writing, and I was blown away by some of her interesting counter arguments to the prevailing theories around cyber warfare. And she also wrote the book called Women in Tech. And it's an interesting book about how to take your career to the next level in foreign policy. No, in tech. Just the next level in tech. I'll tell you what, I'm going to bring her in, and we are going to talk about all the other stuff, the new stuff, and everything in a little bit later on. We've got so much interesting information about what's going on in Belarus and the Putin summit. We'll talk about the Trump legal affairs, but let's say hi to Tarah. Tarah, I'm going to get this wrong a million times. Sorry, Tarah. I'm sorry I keep getting your name wrong. Tarah's from the South. Are you from the South? I feel like that is.
I have family from the South, but interestingly enough, I think, so my mother actually had me on February 12th, which is Abraham Lincoln's birthday. And I'm actually named for the Abraham the patriarch's father, Terah, but it's a feminized version of it. Oh. I went back and looked and found out that Terah means goat watering station in Aramaic. So don't look for beauty there, but I'm here for it. Anyway, I think it was a lot of Demerol went into that decision by my mom. So
that's really a very good decision that she made. It's a good name. Suits you well. It suits your lipstick well. It's a trademark you've got, I think. You were on the phone with NATO today and some other exciting things, which I'm sure this is not going to feel anything like that because it's not so serious. But we are going to talk a little bit about your book, and I also want to talk a little bit about what's going on globally with cyber warfare and ransomware and everything. I'll start with your book because you made me feel like I wanted to be a woman in tech, because women in tech seem to be, I mean, I'm guessing because your book seems to be an accurate reflection, really nurturing, caring. Your whole book is so nice to read because it's all about getting people into the industry. It's encouraging. It's sweet. Where men in tech, I just feel are just like exactly the opposite. Whatever, they're conniving and whatever. Is that accurate? Is there a Venus and a Mars in the tech world?
I'm just imagining my husband right now listening to this. He'll get a chance to listen to it later. No, actually, my book is pretty savage.
Yeah.
I'm busy talking about how the women that I know come out of just extraordinary backstories and lives. I've had a lot of dads come to me to sign this book for their little girls, and I was like, have you had a chance to look in here? There's a lot of profanity. And we're talking about some people and stories that are just they're heartrending, but at the same time hopeful, I think. And the advice there is it's working for everybody, not just women. So the stuff I do, mostly salary negotiation, and I think you could find out from a lot of people that you don't want to be on the other side of that one.
I'm sure. But your approach in the writing it is so nurturing and so caring, and I think that's is reflective of women. And certainly all my favorite women, all my favorite bosses have been women. They've just been better to work for. They've been easier to work for, and they care more. Where men are just, and it seems for themselves, or they just don't want to seem like they care, or I don't know, maybe it's just a little too much ego for them. And I always wonder whether we're struggling in our world today because there are so many people that are men in the tech business. I mean, I can't remember the stat at the top of your book, but it was something like, it was a high number. Remind me again, it was 38% was the peak of women. And that was many, many years ago in the tech industry. What is it today?
It was 1984 that we peaked with women in the tech industry at 38%. Today, it's 11% and dropping. And it may not seem like it's dropping, but it actually is, as we see, especially over the course of the pandemic, how women were pulled offline from the high-profile jobs that they had, especially in technology that demands so much of your time, to do a lot more in the way of family and primary care. And it's unfortunate, but I think that the perspective I like to come with is one that's compassionate. And compassion is a hard discipline. And I think that everybody, women, men, anyone in this field can practice that and try to practice a little empathy. And empathy is not fluffy. It's not soft. It is a battle to try to see the world as other people do and put yourself in their shoes and really act like you are acting on behalf, not just of yourself, but of the people that you lead and are part of a team with. So I hope that we'll see some improvements in the future on this one. We're seeing certainly some good initiatives from the Biden administration on bringing more women into technology. We just had our first, I believe, woman of color put in charge of the DOJ today, which is absolutely wonderful.
Oh, that's interesting. That's good news.
Yeah,
I find it maybe has impacted our world in having so many men with so much power, especially in Silicon Valley, has been maybe a bit problematic. I think, there's a certain kind of libertarian thinking that has taken over all of Silicon Valley that is, I'm not judging libertarians, but I just feel like it has overtaken that whole sector. And they have this sort of superpower or superhero sort of view of themselves, and they feel like they can change the world no matter what anyone thinks.
I've seen that happen before. That sort of objectivist philosophy creeps into a lot of thinking. I was actually reflecting back on one of my favorite doorstop fantasy novel series. It's Terry Goodkin's The Sword of Truth series. If you pretend that the whole thing ends at book 6, you're better off with Faith of the Fallen, trust me. And I started to think back and realize how many of these sort of epic fantasy stories have this central theme that tells a story of a hero and the objectives they overcome. It's the hero with 1,000 faces, like Joseph Campbell. Everyone wants to be the center of their own myth.
Right.
And the problem is when they start buying their own mythology. So.
Yeah. I mean, especially with people like Elon Musk and what have you, but we won't go into that right now. Noel, do you have any questions you want to jump in now, or should I just keep going and then...
Just keep going. I love that she gave a shout out to Kristen Clark and Joseph Campbell in the same section. That's just awesome.
I knew you'd relate. You talk about being the sort of the cyber warfare person that foreign policy goes to. I feel like we are sometimes in the middle of cyber war when we do these kinds of programs here. We started on all of us as a group of us. It started on the internet and on Twitter. We all met each other on Twitter in trying to analyze what Trump Russia was all about and who Trump's relationship with Putin was and what was the actual thing that was going on. We think we figured it out first, and we did it all through a crowdsourcing effort on Twitter. And out of that, we've sort of grown this little community, and we do these shows. What we've also found is that we are constantly at the whim or mercy or attack of foreign forces. Like, it's not, we're just ordinary people living in our ordinary lives, but we come across people that are, real operatives, real governments that are after us. People running like dirty campaigns against us or trying to discredit us, and it's such a foreign thing for us to go through. And yet here we are just sitting on Twitter doing either tweeting or doing live video. How serious is this information war? I feel like we're in the middle of a very consequential information war, and that we're, no one's really paying as much attention as maybe they should to it. And this is maybe the front line. But how serious do you think it is?
I think it's more serious than most people want to acknowledge because we have enough to worry about right now, right? We're worried about whether or not the tax stimulus is going to show up in our bank accounts. We're worried about whether or not we can go back to work on time, about the economy. I know most of the people I know at this point are worried about secure housing because of the spike in home prices. There's a lot of things to worry about, and it seems problematic to start worrying about an information war as well. To be frank, there's a pretty clear division between disinformation and actual hurting people in real life. You can actually hurt people with a computer. You can tamper with water supplies, power grids, the logistics that get people food and medication. That's real impact on human beings. And there's also this side campaign happening in dis and misinformation, and it's devastating to experience either of those things. I think you've got a view into this now as somebody who's prominent on the internet. You, Zev, can now see what it's like to be targeted by people who are trying to drown out truth and facts and sources of real information and try to skew your perspective on the world. I know something about what it's like to see that onslaught of voices trying to convince you that something is not real that is, or the other way around. And there's so much danger in just accepting what is placed in front of you as actual truth. And people do have to go and find sources for themselves. I know that a lot of the smart people that I know pick a weekly source of news and they make sure to read it just to make sure that they're catching real truth someplace, whether that's The Economist or New Scientist or any reputable news source that's out there, especially if you can get one outside your country. It does help to really keep a perspective on how the world is working. But I do want to note that there's a difference between experiencing that as a privileged person on the internet, which I am respectfully, the people in this conversation right now that are here hanging out on the internet and jamming on cyber warfare. We're not always the ones who experience the devastating effects of it. And those attacks that we've seen start to build over time, in 2017 especially. It was the real beginnings of when we saw cyber warfare starting to hurt people, physically hurt them. With both NotPetya, the Russian attack on the Ukraine, and WannaCry, the North Korean attack on the United States, which overflowed into the National Health Services hospitals in the United Kingdom, shutting them down, hurting people, stopping them from getting cancer treatments, stopping emergency room admissions. That's real damage to real people, and it is happening on the internet. And we've got to draw a little bit of a line between an angry mob coming at me on Twitter and people who can't get their medication or admitted to the hospital. And I want to draw that line.
Two very important. Yeah. That's a really important distinction. And let's talk about the serious one. Let's talk about the hospitals and the gas supply lines that we've just recently experienced with Colonial. We had during COVID as well. I think some of the hospitals went down because people couldn't access their records because their mainframe databases went down. So, I'm not sure who was responsible for that attack. Maybe you do, but it does feel like we do know who was responsible for Colonial. It's supposedly this gang that's run out of Russia. Now they've been shut down, probably by America, but who knows? And they got $5 million from Colonial, which is a lot of money for any company to pay, just to get the gas supply up. And meanwhile, there was a real disruption. Most people, most analysts, and maybe you'll tell us if you agree, say that there's no ways that came out of Russia without Putin having blessed it or at least allowed it to go on.
The saying in my industry right at the moment is attribution is hard. It's difficult to know who's behind a given attack. There are a lot of attacks that are appropriately attributed to Russia. And I can guarantee you right now that an appropriate attribution was the NotPetya attack in 2017 that stopped about 40% of world shipping. It stopped Maersk dead in its tracks.
Wow, I remember that.
And for perspective, remember, we're all fascinated by the evergreen container ship that's got stuck in the Suez Canal like a month ago. It stopped 12% of world shipping. For perspective, that was 27% of a NotPetya. Right. And when we start thinking about what's interesting to look at on Instagram videos as opposed to what's actually happening in the world, that attack, that NotPetya attack, is one that stopped prescription medication from getting to the right people. Food rotting in container ships, floating on the ocean, stuck, dead in the water, literally dead in the water. This is real and it's happening right now. And when we attribute that attack to Russia, when we attribute WannaCry to North Korea, we are sure, as sure as you can be, after the kind of appropriate and thoughtful post-mortem and incident response reports that we do, that those are correct attributions. I'm hesitant to instantaneously assign attribution for something like DarkSide in terms of state-sponsored actions until we get a chance to really think about it. And the reason why is I am really sick of people opining on the internet without having any basis for their facts. We need to have this shared history of what's going on, because otherwise, Zev, while you're having these conversations, you can't look at a history of what's gone on in cyber warfare over the last 25 years. Right. If you want to start, you could try with Jay Healy's book, Fierce Domain, and start looking at some of the work that's coming out now from the smart people that are really focused on providing this kind of shared history for what's been going on. And that's where you're going to find the best attribution we've got.
But in fairness, about DarkSide, you've got, there's been tracking of $5 million being paid from Colonial to the company in Bitcoin, or to the gang in Bitcoin. We know they operate out of Russia. We know that they screen out for Cyrillic text. We know how Russia runs. I mean, most people in Russia don't get to do very much without, certainly not anything criminal, without Putin knowing about it. So, there's at least a framework to suspect that it was Russia, even if it may have been for a different client. Maybe it wasn't for the state per se, but maybe it certainly originated out of Russia, and they would have known about it.
That $4.4 million in Bitcoin is interesting. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't disagree with anything you've said right now, but note, I want to go to something you just said. They screened for Cyrillic text. Mm-hmm. What that tells you is that you can aim a cyber weapon. All right. Mm-hmm. You can aim it. You can be selective on who it hits. And when we start having conversations about whether or not this was Russia or not, we know that it's possible to screen your targets. And what I'm concerned about are the hospital ransomware attacks that you've already brought up. Mm-hmm. Because what we know is that it's possible to screen targets. It's possible when you look at banners for networks that your coming near. As an offensive security researcher, when I go look at a network, I get information just from a network announcing itself. It says, hello, I run Epic Systems. Hello,
Right.
I am from One Medical, right? You can see those words, those keywords, and you can screen for those just as easily as you can for Cyrillic. You can aim weapons. And carelessness in how those weapons get deployed is why we need to start having a conversation about these gangs, and especially state-sponsored or paid gangs, really being considered nation-state level cyber attacks. And if they're nation-state level cyber attacks that are spilling over purposefully or carelessly onto hospitals and onto civilians and hurting them, we need to have a conversation about whether or not that constitutes a cyber war crime.
Absolutely.
And if you take a look at the International Criminal Court under Rome Statute 8, you will find it right there.
You know what? I want to talk about Roman Protasevich right now because it's such an important thing. But I also want to bring in Andrew Laufer because he's here. So let me bring in Andrew and we'll quickly say hello to him because I don't want to keep him waiting. I know he's doing us a favor for dropping in here, but we got to do a couple of quick tweaks here. And hey, Andrew, how are you?
Hey, Zev, how's it going?
I am terrific. Thank you for joining us. This is Tarah. I'm going to get it wrong. Tarah Wheeler. And you, of course, know Noel.
Hey, guys. Hey, Tarah.
Andrew,
good.
Let's talk about the news first. And then, although I was so interested in what you were just talking about, let's finish what your thought was about that, about what we need to do in terms of the gangs and the Russian gangs. Like, what kind of laws, international war crimes, do you think we could be dealing with when you're dealing with cyber crimes like this? Sorry, I'll be right there with Andrew. Just want to complete that thought.
Sure, absolutely. So when we talk about the concept of a cyber war crime, I want you to realize something. When we talk about things like mustard gas, which is a really good analogy for WannaCry in 2017, it was something indiscriminately released that harmed civilians, and the effects can be felt to this day of that attack. We don't require that hospitals be perfect on their cybersecurity in order to protect themselves versus cyber attacks. We just require in international law that they be clearly marked. Somebody got to paint a big red cross on the top of them. We don't require that civilian installations and places of worship and hospitals be underground and covered in Kevlar and puppies, right? We require only that they are clearly marked, and they are. And there's a responsibility for people deploying, creating cyber weapons to note and to screen for those kinds of networks.
You can't hear anything? No, you can't hear anything? I can hear everything.
Can you hear me just fine?
I can hear you.
Just checking. Okay, good to go.
No, Andrew, can you hear Tara? Yeah, you can hear it.
Okay.
So does
yeah, and I'm love.
Is there such a thing as a cyber war crime or not? This is something we need to work on, in your opinion.
I believe that we already have defined war crimes, and the fact that we're not calling some of these crimes against civilian populations, hospitals, places of worship, I believe the fact that we're not calling these war crimes already just has to do with a lack of political will. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of political will that hasn't been used on the part yet of the activist pulled off the plane. Roman needs to be set free. And as a student pilot, I'll tell you right now, I'm in the middle right now of getting my private pilot's license, and the plane slacks everywhere are just lit up over this one because the consequences to aviation safety and how we report and handle security in the skies are deeply at risk right at the moment. I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
I mean, I think you're so right about Roman, and he's in terrible condition. Apparently, he's beaten to the point where he might be in hospital and in critical condition. So we're all hoping that that's not the case, but we also know what Putin is capable of, and he literally, I can't believe the extent that he went to, hijacking a plane as a state actor, and people will say that it's not him, it's the Belarus president, but it really is Putin. I mean, there's no ways that the Belarusian leader needed to do this right now on his way out the door. This is Putin's little campaign. It's a little test of the West. It's how far he can push us. How far can he go into Europe and grab people, just like he did with the spy. Escapes my name right now in London, but he's been lawless around the world and extending his lawlessness around the world. And what we saw with Roman was just horrific. Boy, we're trying to talk to so many things here, but I want to talk to all of these. But Andrew, let's any thoughts on those two things, on cyber war crimes and on Roman, and then we'll talk about Donald Trump after that.
Well, with regard to cyber war crimes, you have a professional on here, so I'm just going to leave the thoughts that were already placed out there there. In terms of the kidnapping by Lukashenko KGB thugs from Belarus, this is just state-sponsored terrorism, and it needs to be treated as such. And I agree with you that Lukashenko, Putin mini-me, even though he's probably twice the size of Putin, essentially wouldn't do something like this unless, he had the go ahead. I mean, they're thugs. They're mobsters. They're doing what thugs and mobsters do in terms of gaining power, in terms of exerting their power, I should say. It's all the same stuff. It's all about muscle. It's all about intimidation. It's all about threats.
Although, frankly, we've never seen this before, have we? Have we ever seen a hijacking of a commercial plane that's not even attending? It's not even landing in that country, and to scramble a jet on a false pretense of a terror attack.
And this is the first time in aviation history, yes.
And the jet was a Russian jet, a Russian fighter jet, and then on top of that, there were 4 Russian agents on board. So they were planning this. This was not some accidental. We see him on board. We're gonna take him. They were following him on board. They had 4 agents that were on there with him. So Putin has a lot to answer for, and I'm really struggling with any appeasement right now from the Biden administration or any conversations with Putin. Of course, it's better than the other prospect, which is war. But it certainly is important that when we go there, we confront them with the right message that this is unacceptable, that we can't have journalists. This is no different than Khashoggi in my mind, because he's in just as rough. He's in such rough shape he may not make it, and he's 26 years old. I mean, what does Putin need to go and do with a 26-year-old blogger? Basically, I mean, is he really a threat? Is he really a threat to Vladimir Putin? Not at all. He's just a show of force. Andrew, let's talk a little bit about Trump. Because the implications tonight are that this is, we're heading into an indictment. Everyone's getting very excited. Weisselberg's basically going to flip. All those things might be true, but none of those things are true right now, are they?
Well, my opinion is that I think that any kind of grand jury that Vance may have convened is much further along than just making the announcement now. Usually when they make these types of announcements, they're not going to wait another 6 months before something drops. I mean, that's usually what happens. They're usually kind of priming the battlefield, so to speak.
Right.
Priming the public for this kind of thing. And personally, although I don't have any evidence right now, my feeling, is that there's other grand juries out there currently investigating Trump and his kids.
Probably right.
New York State AG. I'm sure there may be some federal grand juries out there. Who knows?
This was only Silver Lakes, right? This was mostly the Silver Lakes investigation, or whatever that probably was called.
This was about mortgage, and tax fraud. I believe that that Vance is investigating.
Yeah.
And in terms of inflating property values and in some instances and deflating it in others. So Vance is not going to put something before a grand jury. And the vast majority of district attorneys are not going to put something before a grand jury unless they feel that pretty confidently that they're going to get an indictment. So right. I'd say it looks like it's a very good sign.
Do you think that they know that Weisselberg has flipped already, or do you think they're just still pushing on that?
I think it's pretty obvious that he's flipped. I don't think it's a question of whether or not he will anymore.
Okay. Noel, do you want to jump in? Because we lost you for a few minutes.
I know. Sorry, my audio went out.
No worries.
I'm fascinated by Andrew and everything he says. He's the expert. So I'm heartened to hear that Weisselberg has flipped. And Seven Springs is the property's name, I believe. It's up by me in Katona. And I believe Trump bought it for around $7 million and then put on his assets. He listed it for like $180 million.
Oh, wow.
12 years later. And I can assure you, there aren't many properties in all of Westchester that are worth $180 million. To give anybody an idea of how cartoonishly false that is, a statement, it's just beyond belief. And it's totally Trumpian. It's totally the kind of thing he would do in his arrogance, thinking he would get away with it. You could see making it 21 million. 30 million. He did it to a ridiculous amount. And that's Trump, and hopefully it's finally caught up with him.
I wonder if anyone's thought about, the tax investigation the New York Times did, where they found that he didn't declare very much of his apprentice earnings. I think that was the big investigation there. I mean, that might play a piece of this too, right? I mean, he never declared a lot of that revenue. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that certainly can play a part of it as well. It depends on what taxing authority. Obviously, the IRS is going to be involved with that, but what state is going to be involved with that? I'm assuming that's New York State. Tish James could be investigating that. I'm sure she's investigating a number of different things right now. She wouldn't have made the announcement she made earlier this week, I believe, that, or maybe it was the weekend, that she's also opened a criminal investigation against the Trump organization, and that usually when you have something like that, you usually hold the top people there criminally liable for wrongdoing. So that would be the Trump kids and Trump possibly himself.
I'm putting you down as he's going to get indicted based on this prediction. I hope you're right. And by the way, just so you know, just keep track of everyone. Noel said he wasn't going to be. Well, he's going to be indicted, but not going to jail.
I'm the comedian though, so I'm allowed to be wrong.
Hey, Andrew, thanks so much for dropping in. I appreciate it. Such late notice. I appreciate you just dropping by on such short notice. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
All right, we'll have you back on soon.
It was really nice to meet you, Andrew.
Pleasure meeting you as well, Tarah. I'm going to follow you on Twitter.
It's a really good idea. It's a good follow.
Oh God. We need to have a conversation. Words mean things again, people.
Words do mean things. Oh, wait a minute. That's not fair. I cut him off right there. Oh, wait.
Andrew is the funniest lawyer you will ever meet. Dude.
Yeah, he's also one of the best
smartest
civil rights lawyers around.
Yeah.
I can't get it back on because I actually screwed up my picture here. I'm going to say goodnight, Andrew, and we'll be back. We'll catch up on that conversation later. Let's get back to where we were, Tarah, about the cyber war crimes. I mean, I'm so fascinated by the fact that our government has been so tepid and other governments have been so tepid in approaching these things as war crimes. Every country, every Western country in the world has been paying millions of dollars to these ransomware gangs. They'd rather do that than it seems than go down to declaring these war crimes.
There's a problem with that, and it's something I'm actually in the middle of writing a piece on it at the moment. One of the reasons that I'm angry about these kinds of ransomware payments right at the moment, and yet still think that companies should be permitted to pay them, is because they're tax deductible.
Oh, really?
Your tax dollars are going to, absolutely they are. They are a necessary and ordinary business expense, is the tax classification for paying off a ransomware attack in a nation state level attack. So just in case you wanted to be mad about something else today, I'm here to help you out.
I mean, that does make me kind of mad that's going to.
Does it make you mad? That
a gang in Russia is getting all this money? Yep. Yes, it makes me mad.
$4.4 million for the Colonial Pipeline. That is a tax deductible payment. Yeah. So the problem that we have here is we're fortunate to know about the Colonial Pipeline attack, but there are a lot of other companies that have made these kinds of payments that have never reported it publicly. And when I say reported it publicly, I mean either to their shareholders or to the federal government. They have to report it in terms of their taxes, whatever is private or between them and the IRS. That's not a public announcement, and that's still tax deductible. So the problem we have here is that companies are the front line in these kinds of cyber attacks. And as a result, we have sort of devolved our responsibility as a nation for doing war on to Microsoft and Google and Amazon and companies you've never heard of before, because all they do is run 25 contracts for critical infrastructure for the electric grid in the Southwest, right?
Right.
So when we've got these kinds of contracts, when we've got this incentive to pay and stay quiet, you know what you get is more ransomware. So what we need to do is disincentivize these kinds of payments. Now, I don't have a problem with companies needing to pay ransomware payments. I don't. If you're running critical infrastructure and you are keeping people alive or the power on, or please, the air conditioner going this summer, right? Please keep doing what you need to do to fulfill your responsibilities. But there needs to be a knock onto that, which is that we need transparency as a society, as a government, as the IRS, as the federal government, and as the people who are part of this industry. We need to know how bad this problem is. And the only way that happens is with transparency. If it's going to be tax deductible, I say we need to know about it.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Noel.
Well, it's an excellent point. And just think about like how much corruption it would open itself up to if it became commonplace for companies to start paying this and we didn't know about it. You'd have employees inside cutting a deal with a hacker, hypothetically.
Oh, yeah.
saying, "I'll give you the password."
It's not hypothetical.
Okay,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's not
That's
hypothetical.
Right.
These incentives have been here for the last 20 years, right?
Isn't
This tax deductibility has been there all along.
Right.
Isn't that what happened with
Yeah.
SolarWinds at the end of the day? Didn't they happen to have an inside person? That was at least what was suspected, that there was someone on the inside created a
Right.
vulnerability there.
I'll hold judgment on that one. That one is appropriately attributed to Russia. This
Right.
SolarWinds, or what we're calling Sunburst now, that's appropriately attributed to Russia.
Okay.
And that's after,
Russia as in the
months and months.
GRU, or the state acting body of
As
Russia.
in the SVU.
SVU, okay.
Yeah. SVR. Sorry, SVR. See, this is the problem. I was reading too much CNN about that little girl that fought off that bad guy, and Mariska Hargitay was like super cool about it. And now I got SVU in my head instead of SVR. This is what happens when you mix cybersecurity and pop culture in your brain.
You shouldn't do it.
So it was SVR. Yeah.
Stick with cyber
it's appropriately attributed, but we don't know, and I can't assert yet about what was or was not an inside job there. What I can tell you is that there were indications that security at SolarWinds was not all it should be. The former CEO had blamed an intern for the fact that one of their production servers in 2018 was found to have a password of SolarWinds 123. Now, that's terrible, but what's terrible is not that the intern had set the password to SolarWinds 123. What was an intern doing with access to a production server without supervision? And that is an indication to anyone like me who has an evil mind but good intentions, that there might be security problems in a company like that one.
You should have said, definitely gone with SolarWinds 1, 2, 3, 4 at least. Extra digit would have been helpful there. That attack worries me the most. Of all the things that keeps me up at night is, what do they have a hold of in terms of the American government's infrastructure and the network? I mean, it seems like they got access to everything. What kind of
security agency? Yeah.
What can they do with that access?
So there's a lot of disturbing elements to this. That hack is one of the more devastating ones that I can imagine at the moment. There's a lot of showier, flashier ones. The Colonial Pipeline, for all that it called attention to a lot of issues in cybersecurity in critical infrastructure, it actually wasn't that. Don't shoot me for this one. It wasn't that bad. This was Colonial shutting off their billing system because they couldn't figure out how to get paid for people taking oil. It's not like someone came and chainsawed through the pipeline for what of it was physical and not virtual.
Right.
The SolarWinds attack is a lot more like the 2014 OPM hack, the Office of Personnel Management hack, in which hundreds of thousands of Americans who had filled out a form SF-86, that's for a top secret clearance in the US government, had their information stolen by the Chinese. And that is incredibly unfortunate because this is leverage over people. This is your affairs, your gambling habits, your credit, the time you shoplifted when you were a kid. Like, that was purged from my record. I'm good. But when we're talking about this kind of hack, we're talking about the kind of embarrassing hack that is like the Sony hack of 2014 as well. The Sony hack in 2014, done by North Korea as retribution for the James Franco, Seth Rogen, I'm going to say it was really funny movie. No, it was funny.
It is kind of funny.
You had to be in a certain state of mind in order to really appreciate it.
I agree.
But it was a critique of Kim Jong-un, right? Yeah. And so this was a retaliatory attack. If North Korea had done $100 million worth of damage to an airfield in Texas or a mine in Appalachia, we would have no problem calling that a war crime or a nation state level attack. So we got to go and understand what's really devastating here, and losing this kind of information about how our government communicates, that's much more devastating than a single company with a problem with billing, honestly.
Right. And we know that North Korea, Russia, probably China does this kind of stuff a lot. Does the American government do this kind of stuff, or does the British government do this kind of stuff, or Canadians who,
Two responses.
Yeah.
I certainly hope so, and gosh, that's shameful. We shouldn't be doing that.
We should.
And that's because this is the game. This is geopolitics.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing it. They're doing it. Everybody's doing it. I certainly hope we are not committing cyber war crimes and shutting down hospitals.
Right. Let's talk about the other stuff. It is then you've spoken now about the. Well, sorry, Noel. I keep going.
No, keep going.
You mentioned the one side, which is the side of the hospitals being hurt, or the oil supply lines, or whatever the critical infrastructures are being hurt. You've spoken about companies that are being hurt. I want to get back to this disinformation and misinformation piece of it, which is this other. assault on our brains that has convinced 53% of the Republican Party still that the election was won by the wrong guy, or that QAnon is a real thing, or that it's okay to go and attempt a coup on January the 6th. I mean, this is the kind of stuff they've done through mind control. Now, some of that mind control is on social media. Some of it is coming from these right-wing news networks like Fox News or OAN or Newsmax. But as a totality, it seems like a really massive machine that is really hard to overcome. It's not by accident that it's here. I mean, someone must have built this on purpose.
I can't speak to the purposeful nature of it, but I can certainly tell. There's two things that come to mind when I hear you say this. First of all, the nausea in the pit of my stomach when I realized what was going on the 6th of January. I was in quarantine in the UK, about ready to start my Fulbright in cybersecurity there. I was there interviewing the incident responders from WannaCry. These are the people who were keeping NHS hospitals running in the middle of this attack, and what they had to do, and just kind of listening to their stories, their PTSD, kind of, expressing thanks from, a grateful world for keeping these hospitals going. I'm getting ready to go and start these interviews kind of full time, and sitting in quarantine and listening to what's happening and realizing that this is all part of the same problem. It's all part of a problem where we've created tools in the internet that we can plug directly into the human mind. No neural mesh is needed for this, right? We've created these tools that can create a sense of reality, and we're buying into that reality, and that is many-edged as a weapon. And the second thing I think of is I think of family members and friends and people I know who I don't really know any longer, who have been caught up in these kinds of lies. And it's easy to make fun and mock these kinds of beliefs, but there is a messianic quality to the QAnon conspiracy theory that it just makes it a nifty little side dish to so many other forms of really isolated, beliefs and structures. I'm a preacher's kid, so I know a little bit about growing up thinking the world is 6,000 years old.
Right.
I'm a scientist now, so I'm not only better, but I'm also a person who converted to Roman Catholicism in 2013. So I grok faith. I like it. For peace, for social action, right? One of the primary tenets of the Catholic Church is social justice. I'm here for it, right? And so I understand both this perspective of needing to question something and also needing to take things on faith. But there is an element to this QAnon conspiracy that is somehow magically attractive and also resists the kind of debunking that other strange belief systems have not, been able to resist. I don't know why that is,
because it's always
and I'm
rooted in
afraid
truth.
to look into it.
All these disinformation efforts, all these things that have been made up that are sort of these conspiracies, there is always a kernel of truth to it. There's always something that you can really prove, and that only one person could let you know that it's real, and then they show it to you, and then once you know that one thing is real, you expect everything else to be just as real until you get drawn into this rabbit hole. But there is a kernel of truth to that story. It may be attributed to the wrong people, it may be mistold, but it certainly is provable. And that's the difficult part. Yeah.
I want to ask Noel, actually. I haven't had a chance really to talk with you, Noel, but one of the things that I know, I'm loving this conversation. Yeah. Noel, one of the things that I've seen, and I've seen it in tech, with some of those, the guys that think that they run the world. I've seen it, this kind of messianic quality. I've seen people buy into a reality distortion field before, in tech, in politics. I've seen what it feels like to fall under the spell of someone. And you've been around these kinds of personalities who can just look at you in the eye and tell you that a thing is true, and you just never stop to question it. And that power, that charisma can be turned so evilly. I would love to know kind of what your perspective on it is, honestly, if I can ask that question.
Please.
I'm interested to know what you say.
You hit the nail on the head. Somebody like Trump did have like a messianic pull to a certain type of individual. There was always guys in New York that kind of looked up to him, that like, oh, that guy's the coolest. He's a billionaire. So he had the initial sort of like sugary flavor that would draw in these people, so to speak. Like if you spilt some syrup on the ground, a bunch of ants run into it. But I think you hit the nail on the head. I think Trump sort of like magnetism to an unsophisticated populace was then married to like the much more sophisticated Russian cyber warfare kind of things that you just spoke about. And something else is going on now. I love what you just said, Tarah, because I've noticed it recently. I'll give an example. Last week, and this happens to me all the time, but last week, some girl that I knew 20 years ago, not some girl, a woman that I worked with when she was a kid 20 years ago. We had a job in Manhattan at like a publishing company. It was now a lawyer, was a pretty normal person when I knew her, had been weaponized into this whole kind of MAGA cult thing and sort of had been mildly commenting on my Facebook posts throughout the years. And last week, she just sort of like attacked a clip I put up of my podcast, and it occurred to me, like, what would make this once mild-mannered person that I haven't spoken to, in 20 years, that I'm casually friends with on Facebook, but have never interacted with, comment in a sort of aggressive, somewhat violent way on my post? That didn't happen before. 15, 20 years ago, somebody wouldn't be like, if they liked Bush, and I liked Clinton, they wouldn't go out of their way to publicly kind of go on the attack. But I find these Trump supporters and MAGA and QAnon, they're doing that. They're being weaponized. There was something in this, 40-something-year-old woman's psyche that was like, I'm going to publicly, sort of attack this guy that in the normal kind of tenets of society you wouldn't do. You know what I mean? You wouldn't reach out to a colleague of 20 years ago and say something embarrassing, or an aggressive that would cause them to block you. This is a new phenomenon that we're seeing, and it's like you said, Zev, it's the way that like this information works on the human brain, because they think they're figuring it out for themselves. They read these articles and then they think, they've got these answers, and then they proselytize about it to their fellows who are already partial to this kind of disinformation, and then it takes on a life of its own. They become advocates of misinformation, and they don't even realize it. It becomes gospel, and it's dangerous. And I see the aggression being pumped up. So whoever's turning these screws, they're turning a lot tighter these days. Maybe that's because Trump's on the ropes. Maybe because Biden's going to go after Putin harder. Who knows? But I sense something in the ether that isn't right, and it's much more aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes any sense, and it's fed every day by your Marjorie Taylor Greens, by this sort of performative bullying and hectoring that's just out there. It kind of, all of that noise amplifies this inner conflict in these people, and they feel like they feel compelled to act upon it. And somebody like Trump is the perfect beast as a vessel of that sort of thing, because he gets his own piece of that. He's just about scamming money from them, so he doesn't have an end game in terms of a political philosophy. He just wants to steal as much money as he can while he's alive and try to stay out of jail,
But the end goal is polarization, right? They're pulling us apart so that there's more and more conflict all the time. And as we pull apart from each other, we will cut connections with each other. We'll stop talking to people. We'll start, believing things about people that are completely untrue just because you lump them in with so much else that you're being told. And so, this polarization is going to snap. It's like the whole society is being pulled apart until it does snap. And we've seen it in so many ways, and it's not only in, it's not only MAGA and the liberals, but it's also in Black Lives Matter. It's in in these voting counts. There's these fraudulent vote counts that they're doing, these audits. They're designed to ignite tension. They're designed to create viciousness between these parties. So we go at each other. That's what they want. Go ahead.
Can I also note that the cyber ninjas, the cybersecurity auditors who are doing this, please don't judge the rest of my industry by whoever those people are. They are not qualified or capable cybersecurity specialists who are there to do what real experts like Matt Blaze and other intelligent, brilliant people in my field are doing to work on election trustworthiness. And we all know that optical scan ballots with risk limiting audits are the gold standard for how to tell whether or not an election was run the right way. And he's got it. We know
Say
this
that
at
again.
this point.
Say that those
optical scan ballots with risk limiting audits. Optical scan ballots. You fill it in yourself. You do have it read optically so that you can get the automatic vote counts, but you also have that physical piece of paper or a printout that lets you verify your ballot, right?
Yeah,
that's the audit process you can go through later to sample, and risk limiting audits goes through and picks up bits and pieces. Anywhere there might have been a question, you can sample any of those ballots and verify with the individual person later if required. So that's the gold standard for election trustworthiness. If that's been done, whatever these people, some people should not be permitted to use the prefix cyber, and these are some of them. You should not be using a position of trust in cybersecurity to create more conflict and create fuzziness around the truth. You should not be using your position of trust to create harm and division and falsehood instead of supporting the actual truth. And I'm disappointed to see it. I really genuinely am.
Excellent point.
I mean, that's true, but it's not true for every nation around the world. It's not true for all these hackers around the world. People still think, they think of hackers as these guys with hoodies sitting in dark rooms at night. That's not what's going on in the business, right? I mean, maybe you are, but these are massive state-run enterprises now. These are not just a couple of guys hanging out in a basement somewhere. This is a full-on operation by these countries, whether it's North Korea or Russia or anybody else, to take down something. When they're doing it themselves, even when they're not assigning it to gangs or whatever, they've got big units and lots of money attached to it.
They do. Well, two things. First of all, hacking is not a crime. It's a set of skills, and I am one.
Okay.
Second, in the same kind of way that scientific papers around physics now have like 1,000 co-authors, a lot of the low-hanging fruit in offensive cybersecurity has now kind of been plucked, as it were. It takes those resources, those gangs of people working together to create effective kill chains in cybersecurity, in information security, so that you can break into networks, because it's getting harder. That's good. That's really good. It's bad because our quality of enemy is increasing, but it's good that we are pushing harder to make it more difficult for some random human being someplace who's a criminal, computer criminal, not a hacker, but a computer criminal, to try to steal things from people. So remember, hacking is a mindset. It's about seeing the world differently. And it's about taking those sets of skills and taking things apart, putting them back together again so you can understand the world. And hopefully the next level is explaining it to people in a way that makes them understand what it is.
So what's the distinction between good hacking and bad hacking then? What would you call the bad hacking? Crime. All right.
Crime, literally crime. Crime is bad hacking.
Okay, literally that.
Exactly. It's why we differentiate between hacking and a computer criminal. A computer criminal is someone who's using a computer to do bad things. A hacker, that's just a set of skills. You can, as a locksmith, help people get into their cars or test locks, or you can be part of a criminal gang and use your skills to break into banks.
That's a good point.
You're a locksmith either way. Just in one of those ways, you're a bad person.
I have to take a break because I didn't realize how far we got in the show and we hadn't taken a break. When we come back from the break, I want to hear from you about the things that people could do to safeguard their universes, whether it's their homes, their work, or their country. I will get your tips after this. Tonight's show is brought to you by Helix Sleep, and they have a special offer for narrative viewers. I've heard it from so many people. The one thing that's changed since January is their sleep. Not waking up worrying about what the president might have done or said or tweeted makes the world of a difference. I don't think I had a good solid night's sleep in 4 years. And it wasn't only the president. My 10-year-old mattress, which started life as a 12-inch foam mattress, had shrunk to an 8-inch mattress, and getting out of bed was often more of a slide than a bounce. It was time for a new mattress. Helix Sleep has a quiz that takes just 2 minutes to complete and matches your body type and sleep preferences to the perfect mattress for you. Why would you buy a mattress made for somebody else? Changing the course of a country can take a village. Changing the course of your sleep takes a quiz. Helix is offering up to $200 off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners at helixsleep.com/narrative. That's the way we spell narrative, NARATIV. That's helixsleep.com/narrative for up to $200 off and 2 free pillows just for you. Tonight, we're going to do that together next time, Noel. I'm excited about that. We're going to learn about you're going to do your sleep quiz with Helix next time.
Sounds good.
So let's talk about people's homes, because I guess people feel like I feel, but I guess it's my job, that there's anybody could probably see everything all the time. Is that true? Can the NSA or any other country that has that kind of capability see into our world if they want to at any given time?
That's a complicated question. It's a complicated question because there are some cases in which you would want governments to have the jurisdiction to be able to execute on search warrants, even in cyberspace. And as someone who tends towards that sort of very a little bit more of that libertarian mindset, it kills me to admit this, but there are times and places that you do need governments to be able to execute on warrants. That doesn't necessarily mean encryption backdoors.
Right. Okay.
But there are times and places that's possible. And what we would want to do, you're asking me the question, who's watching me through my webcam, basically, right?
Well, or through whatever device. I don't know what they could be watching through.
There's it's a good question. The one of the great ways that you can find out what's available on the internet is an Internet of Things search engine called Shodan. You can take a look at people who've got unsecured nanny cams, home security cameras, all store surveillance cameras just sitting out there on the internet unprotected. So I think the question is really kind of less, can the NSA look at my computer, and more, can the creepy guy down the street look inside my house, right? And the answer is, if you're not securing your home devices, and if you've purchased devices from companies that haven't set good default minimum passwords and a user experience that leads you to change your passwords upon purchase, then it's entirely possible that some jackass is watching you through your cameras.
So that means what? Passwords, of course. It also means smart Wi-Fi, I guess, or sophisticated Wi-Fi, encryption, probably, right? What else should people be doing at home if they're a little bit worried about their level of security?
Well, grade A number one, if you're worried about the kinds of devices that you're purchasing, you want to lobby for stronger standards in consumer labeling, which very fortunately was just included in Biden's new executive order on cybersecurity. The great example of this is the Mirai botnet in 2016. The Mirai botnet took down the Eastern Seaboard's power grid and internet for a period of time. And the reason it did that was that there were multiple ARM devices, ARM processors, like the company ARM that makes the little processors, and a miniature version of Linux, the operating system, running inside multiple different webcams, nanny cams, surveillance cameras. And those cameras were all still set to default password settings.
Unbelievable.
So they were just taken over. So then the shame there is that the companies that sold those products never told their consumers that there was a default password on them and that they needed to change them. If you have devices that are older than 5 years, older than 3 years at this point, because most companies started to take the lesson after that, check and make sure you don't have a default password on your IoT devices, like your home security cameras. If you do, change it to something strong, secure, and different than any of your other passwords. The platinum standard is make sure that every one of your passwords is different. That sounds like an agonizing exercise for anybody trying to remember a few passwords at a time, but just remember, you need to get a password manager. You can use one password, LastPass, KeyPass, the Chrome password manager, the Safari password manager. Somewhere on any of your devices, there's going to be a trusted password manager. Use it. You're way better off that way. Have different strong passwords for everything, and then enable two-factor authentication.
Good advice.
Good advice. Yeah, absolutely.
Don't you want to jump in, or?
No, I need to do all that.
I think to myself, I need to do
yes,
something.
no, you need to do all those things. Like me hollering about this doesn't do anything until you actually go change
Well,
them.
people really
Your
do need to check
keys
this
to your
stuff.
kingdom. Your keys to your kingdom, by the way, is email. If you do nothing else, if anyone listening to this does nothing else, just make sure your email has a strong, different password than everything else, and that you have multi-factor authentication, hopefully app-based, like on your phone when you have to enter in a seed or scan a little QR code. Do that, and do it for your email, because if somebody gets your email, that's game over. It's game over, man.
Game over meaning
So
they can get into everything else.
everything
Or,
else is
okay.
gone. Yeah, they got your bank accounts, they got your house, they got everything. So
Right.
email first, everything else after that.
In terms of like game over for some of these big companies that are getting hacked, I feel like people are working from home. They're using their home computers or whatever software they have at their homes. It strikes me as being pretty vulnerable for a lot of these big corporations that are allowing, hundreds, maybe thousands of people to log in every day from remote locations from a varying different amount of technology and different standards. How vulnerable are they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Every corporation's endpoints just expanded to include Junior's Xbox.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
this is it's crazy, which has happened. Well, it's scary, but it's also a fascinating opportunity to see how people really were working, because it's not just that it was just at the beginning of the pandemic this happened. It's that a lot of people were doing it before that ever happened, and now it's come out into the open that that's what was going on. So it's really important to recognize people were always working from home. We just didn't have protocols surrounding what you needed to do beforehand. So the risk has increased, but so too has the awareness of the problem. And it's not a problem for people to work from home. There's a lot of really great secure ways to do it. However your company wants to handle it, through a VPN, through whatever kind of setup that your company wants to use. Just make sure you're actually using those protocols. And try not to pipe anything through any of the crazy ass VPNs that somebody's kids might have around for downloading shows. So
good advice again. So we've done some of home, we've done some of work, and now the most terrifying thing is like I keep advocating, for Biden to be tough on Putin and to go out there and really show him what we've got, and you're going to throw Trump in jail. But you might get a reaction from those people when you go do those things, and if they have access to all our networks, they might be able to cause a lot of damage. So part of my understanding of why we were approaching Russia with such a soft diplomacy is because maybe they do have a hold on us. Maybe there is still a lot of catch up that we need to do from that it's the Sunwinds hack or whatever it was. Maybe there's still stuff that we need to do to clean up that, to shore up our cyber security so we can be a little bit more tough around the world.
I love the fact my camera's shaky right now because my cat's standing on the desk and shaking himself and sneezing. And it just reminds us.
Of course you have a cat.
Of course I have a cat. It's a black cat. His name is Frankie. He's awesome. His name is Frankie Fangs.
Frankie Fangs. Good name.
And I love it because it brings us back to the ordinary. And it sounds so, nation state to talk about Biden and Russia and everything like that. And why aren't we attacking? And we have to come back to the ordinary. The truth is that most companies in the United States, most companies around the world are months or even, and this is going to be distressing for some of you to hear, years behind their patching cycle. When something goes wrong with a software product, when a vulnerability is discovered later, the maker will issue a patch for it.
Right.
And there's registries for this. CVEs, the NIST in the United States has a registry of them. They're out there. There's hundreds of thousands of them, and that's just the floor of the known vulnerabilities out there. A lot of companies haven't gone through and patched everything, or they're years out on their patching cycle. So the real thing we need to start doing is our push-ups and eating our broccoli. That's really where this comes to, is talking about going after Russia and unloosing the cyber nukes and rolling over them with cyber takes. And I have heard actual military people use those words before. That's premature before we actually do things like make sure our civilian population is protected, that our companies are patched and up to date, that we're requiring critical infrastructure providers to actually abide by some of the standards that are out there. Biden took a great step just a couple of hours ago, as a matter of fact, requiring now that pipeline companies, whenever they're breached or have any attacks, must report to the federal government. That's an excellent first step.
Wow, I didn't realize that didn't happen. I thought that would happen automatically.
Just a couple of hours ago. Yeah,
wow.
It's great. Yeah, it's making me rewrite this op-ed I got to do. But the important thing to remember here is that it's the civilians who get hurt in cases like this, and our primary focus needs to be not there's a focus on Russia, I get it, but our primary focus needs to be asking the question: why is it okay for our citizens to be served by companies with federal contracts that aren't abiding by the basic minimum principles that are the best information security standards?
Absolutely.
We should be asking companies to protect our citizens, their customers, by patching, by doing the hard work that's dull and boring. It's like highway maintenance. We already built the super exciting freeway, but you know what? We got to fix potholes sometimes.
Before we
start rolling up, Exactly. We got to start fixing the potholes before we go crazy on the military convoys.
But you're still sort of you're not avoiding the question. But the answer is that it's not that we're not very comfortable with our cybersecurity in terms of infrastructure and in terms of the federal government, and that provoking anyone could get a reaction. Now they might not have very secure cybersecurity too. I mean, I don't know. I assume our capabilities in the United States are pretty phenomenal. I'm sure we could do things to them as well. But then you get into this sort of, this almost like a nuclear war until everyone collapses and falls down. So we don't want that. But, to some extent, there's something in cyber that's very helpful in that you can fight a war without actually killing people. I'm sorry.
Can you? Haven't people at this point have in fact died of cyber attacks? A woman in Dusseldorf died last year after a hospital was ransomwared and she couldn't receive treatment in time.
Good point.
So we are seeing people dying. And, as I said before, I was a student pilot. One of the things we say in aviation is our regulations are written in blood. Cybersecurity is starting to be the same way. And so before we grow enthused about, do not be so eager to deal out death and judgment, says Gandalf, right? Let's make sure, and believe me, we've got some serious capabilities. I know some of the people who have come out of the programs we have, tailored access operations, the kind of work that the NSA does, that Cyber Command does. These are skilled, brilliant human beings, and they can do whatever the hell they want to on a computer. We have capabilities. It's just my mission is to care about the people who have to deal with the pothole every day. So I can answer the question, but I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not sitting in Cyber Command right at the moment. I can't tell you what an appropriate moment is to push that button, but I can tell you that unexpected things will happen when we do.
Right. Wow. So, sorry, jump in there if you want, Noel.
No, it's just chilling.
It's chilling, wow. But it's also not that surprising. Are you surprised by it? No, I mean, some of it sort of was expecting.
I've told you that story before. My grandfather was an NSA analyst his whole career, and we had a conversation once about that movie with Gene Hackman and Will Smith, where they could do all this. Right. Yes.
Okay.
And I just watched it, and I was over his house the next day, and I was like, and he never talked about his career. He's NSA. He wasn't like, couldn't say anything. He never spoke to me about it in his entire life. And I said, I just saw this movie last night with Gene Hackman and blah, blah, blah. And they could zoom in and get a close up on somebody's face walking down Fifth Avenue or whatever. And he looked at me and he goes, that's nothing. And I was like, "Oh my god!"
I mean, the capabilities must be incredible. Right. I mean, we invented the playbook, so we must have it. But I still get I feel like because of the tension in the world, and because we can't see cyber and we can't see disinformation, we don't realize what it's doing to us half the time. Like half the time, it's impacting our lives in so many ways. But we just don't know. We just don't know that it is. And sometimes I feel like the other side has got a better handle on the management of it. For some reason, I don't feel like we've quite, we don't have as orchestrated a system as the Russians do, or the Chinese and the Russians do. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Or maybe we're just, the nature of America is to not have a system that controls so much. But it certainly seems like they're having a huger impact on us than we're having on them.
Don't mistake a willingness to do harm indiscriminately with being better at doing harm overall.
Good point.
See, we've got the capabilities. Again. Yeah, we've got the capabilities, but don't mistake a willingness to go further and do more harm and do more evil with a lack of capacity.
Right, which is clearly, just to circle back to Roman Protasevich, that kind of brutal attack that they did on this guy and pulling him off a plane, knowing, that plane landed knowing he was going to be killed, or at least they were going to try to kill him. They knew that, and he told the airline steward, he said, "Don't do this. They are going to kill me. They're going to kill me." And she said, "We have to. We have a legal agreement that we have to land." And so, he hands off his cell phone to his girlfriend, but then they take her as well. And so they're both separated now. He gets obviously beaten in jail. It's so indiscriminate and so brutal, and such a terrible thing to scramble a jet and have this whole operation with four agents on board for what? Because the guy published real photos of the damage you did to protesters and the hurt you did to protesters. Like, this is not. It's so not symmetrical that it just drives you there's just no value system there. And it's so worrying when you see what they can do on so many levels, that they have no respect for human law, for international law, and no respect for human life. So you've got, this combination, which is really add that into the cybersphere, and it's very, very, very troubling.
Let me caution you on one thing. Watch the they. I have friends in Russia. I'm sure you have friends in places that are problematic. They anywhere, Belarus, any of these places. But be careful about the they, because it's exactly what Noel was saying earlier. And it's exactly what you, Zev, were saying earlier about this polarization, about pulling people apart. As soon as we can create an us and a they, it's not only more emotionally comfortable in the same kind of emotionally comfortable way that people who love QAnon want to seek that emotional comfort. In that same kind of way, making it an us and them decreases the complexity, decreases the understanding of what's happening. It's SVR. There's elements in the Russian government. There's elements in the Belarusian government. There's bad people all over the world, but we cannot conflate all of those people with the people that they are oppressing as well. We just want to be cautious about that one thing, I think, and it's because there's no hope if it's an us or a them.
In fact, it's exactly the opposite. They're representing what we may become. They, again, said it again, but the people of Belarus and Russia, they're being oppressed in a way that is in a few years, given whatever might happen in America, we're still not through our process here. Whatever is going on, we could face very, very difficult restrictions like the kind that they're having over there, which is unthinkable right now. And certainly, I don't think it's going to happen. Like, at the end of the day, you don't think that's going to happen, but it is all. They're suffering in a way that we can't imagine, and that's why it's so important in my mind that we are really tough on specifically Putin, because I think he does have responsibility here for this, and then we can prove that there's responsibility here for it. I don't know if it's a good time for us to be, having any sort of dialogue until he's at least freed Roman, because when does it stop? When do we stop hijacking planes and pulling people off planes that aren't even in your territory? I mean, it becomes very, very difficult to imagine when we draw the line, and if we don't draw the line, we'll end up in a who knows where. Yeah, that's my little speech. I got to talk about something happy. Thank you, but we should talk about something happy. Tell me about where you got your cat from. Did you get it from a breeder, or is it a hand-me-down?
I got my cat from a farm in Snoqualmie, Washington. And I went out there and I knew I wanted a black cat, because, sometime around like 8 or 9 years ago, I just decided I was going to wear black every day for everything, because, it's appropriate for everything. And I just don't have enough energy in my head for a whole lot of fashion stuff. So very similar
wardrobe choices. So I hear you on the black. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah. So I just knew I didn't want a cat that had a lot of white fur. And so then I went out to this little barn and saw this little 6-week-old tiny little kitten. And just the owner set him down on the grass, and he had the little tiny feet with the little black beads on them. And he walked over the grass, and then he crawled up into my hair and went, meow. And I turned to the lady and I said, I think 175 is kind of a lot to pay for this, this cat. He's okay, I guess, I'll give you $75. And she was like, no, I'm going to stick with 175. And I was like, here's my phone with my unlocked PayPal account. You may enter any number you wish.
Oh. And you did it.
So yeah, that's how
how old is the cat? 3 years old?
7.
Oh, 7.
He's 7 years old. Wow. And his sister Whisper is 7 years old as well. She's very sweet. Her name is Princess Whisperclaw. She's hanging out someplace else because she's a scaredy cat. She's awesome. The both of them have been very good company, and my lovely husband and I have really enjoyed having them around. Although they've now been recently very freaked out because I just for the first time bought a motorcycle. So I've got a cruiser downstairs, and it freaks them out when I start.
You are an interesting person, Tarah, and really good company as well. I got to say, you are welcome back here anytime. You are really a fun conversation, and so smart and careful. I mean, there is actually such an important difference between women talking about this stuff and men. I just feel like it's a different conversation. Men are not phrasing their conversations around values that you're describing. And I think you are. And it's making a huge, changes the dialogue. If you're talking about the people that are affected or the people affected by the potholes, that changes the whole dialogue. Men talk about blowing things up and sending bombs in, not about fixing potholes. So I think that there's a really important distinction there. And when you say 11% is all we have in technology, I hope women who listen to this show and watch the show, and there are so many of them who are even interested in going technology, I hope they get inspired by what you've done and read your book and follow your footsteps into that world.
It's really kind of you to say. I am standing on the shoulders of a lot of giants at this point, and it's I'm here as a representative of a community, not by myself, and it's the achievements of all of us that get any of us to anywhere we're trying to be. Humanity, we got to get a little further down the field, right? And we're all just trying to kick the ball just a couple inches every day. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me on the show, Noel. It was wonderful getting a chance to talk with you. Thank you so much for your honesty and humor. Is really great. I love being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Tara. Yeah, I'm a cat guy too. I wear black every day. My cat's a tuxedo cat, my best friend in life. And I love what you said about because it's the division that's tearing us apart. It's the division that's tearing at the fabric of our world right now, and we have to sort of come together and not let the bad actors continue to divide us. So I love the hope that you offer in that, and I'm going to adopt that myself. So thank you.
Well said. What a great point to end the show with. So thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll be back on Friday. I'll be back on Friday with the after show. And Tarah, remind people they can find you at Tarah on Twitter.
Yes.
Where else can they find information about you? And then what's the name of your book?
Well, I'm my book's on Amazon at Women in Tech, and I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on that Facebook, that Instagram. Wherever you want to find me. I look angry in my profile picture. There you go. Now you can.
I don't know if you look angry in your profile picture. I don't think so. I would just use a different word, but I'd be getting in trouble if I did. On that note, we'll leave everyone. Have a good night, everybody. Narrative is funded by viewers like you. Support our independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative.